Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Colleagues, House Bill 3328 is the kind of bill that none of us want to bring before this body. We wish that it was the type of bill that we didn't need to have. No one likes to talk about child abuse. However, the truth is that an average of 19 Oregon children die every year as a result of child abuse here in Oregon. Far more live in terror every day, knowing that the very adults who are supposed to protect them instead strike them with their hands, fists, or worse. We must come together to improve our system to protect children. The abuse and neglect of tens of thousands of Oregon kids each year is one of the unspoken tragedies of our state. Sometimes we have individual tragedies that shed light on these problems, and that is what House Bill 3328, also known as Carly's Law, is designed to do. The bill is named for a little girl, a blonde, very adorable little girl named Carly Sheehan. She was 3 years old in June of 2005 when she was brutally murdered as a result of abuse. In 2004, which was the year that Carly's abuse began, DHS reviewed 46,524 reports of suspected child abuse and neglect. At least 2 of those reports in 2004 were about 2-year-old Carly Sheehan. Of those 46,524 reports reviewed, 7,307 cases, or just over 15%, were founded as founded allegations of abuse. Carly Sheehan was one of the 39,217 children, or nearly 85%, whose cases were determined to be unfounded for abuse. Carly was killed several months later in the summer of 2005. By this time, she was 3 years old. In 2005, DHS reviewed 55,114 reports of abuse and neglect. Only about 14% of these cases were founded. And although she died that summer after systemic torture and abuse at the hands of her killer, Carly was not the subject of any of those reports. In fact, we know from research that when an individual has knowledge of actual abuse or neglect, only 1 in 3 times will that abuse or neglect actually be reported. When Carly died in 2005, she was one of 18 Oregon children whose deaths were directly related to abuse or neglect inflicted by their parents or family caregivers. Including Carly, 16 of the children killed by their parents and caregivers that year were under the age of 5. At the end of the trial, the judge who presided over the case noted that Carly's case reflected a continuum of failure in response to child abuse in our community, and specifically to Carly, over the last very difficult 8 months of her life. She suggested that the community was due for some deep soul searching about whether timely and more appropriate investigation might have saved Carly. The judge had said, if we are really willing to look at ourselves, this might be the one good thing that comes from this tragedy. And that is what Carly's Law is designed to do. I'd like to walk you through the provisions of the bill. And first, it's important to point out a couple of points about this case. First, Carly initially was reported to DHS after she reported to her child care provider that someone was hitting her about the head. She saw her family doctor, and there were investigations and interviews that happened, but ultimately DHS dismissed the case as unfounded. Shortly after that, Carly came home to her father again, only this time she was covered from head to toe in bruises. Much of her hair had been pulled out from her head. The father took photos of this beautiful little girl at that time. The police came, the police saw Carly, and the dad even took this child to the DHS office. Nothing happened. The report remained unfounded for abuse. During the trial, these photographs were produced and people had the opportunity to see them. And one of the questions that arose was, how could this case possibly be founded? What is it that went wrong? And looking back, there were many people who felt that if Carly had had the opportunity to be examined by a physician that knew how to diagnose child abuse-inflicted injuries, perhaps the outcome would have been different. or at least if the photographs that were taken had been shared with a physician qualified to examine child abuse investigations, or if those photos had been shared with the rest of the county's multidisciplinary team, that perhaps then this child's life might have been saved. House Bill 3328 starts to put those types of protocols into statute so that we can have consistent child abuse investigation procedures across the state of Oregon. Carly's Law asks that each county multidisciplinary team reaches out to the medical providers in its community, whether that's physicians, pediatricians, nurse practitioners, physician assistants, and finds out which of you are willing and which of you are able to assess a child as part of a child abuse investigation when they have suspicious injuries. Who of you are willing to be resources to the child abuse investigation team? The bill then says that during the course of a child abuse investigation, when the investigator goes out, and remember, only about 40% of allegations are followed up upon with an actual investigation where someone goes out. If that investigator goes out, it might be a law enforcement officer, it might be a DHS worker, and they find that the child has a suspicious physical injury, and we've defined these. These are things like burns or scalds, extensive bruisings or abrasions on any part of the body, or bruising, swelling, and abrasions on the head, neck, or face, fractures of the bone in infants and toddlers, multiple fractures or dislocations, severe cuts, the loss of ability to walk. If the investigator finds that, we're going to change the way we do things in Oregon, and we're going to make sure that kid gets to a doctor within 48 hours. And we're going to try to get that child to a doctor that has experience in assessing child abuse. That's what this part of the bill says. It has sideboards so that if that designated medical professional is not available, the child can still go see another available physician. However, that physician will then consult with the professional that has that understanding of child abuse investigations and child abuse assessment. The bill also says that when that investigator goes out and encounters this child in the course of a child abuse investigation, when they have these injuries, they're going to photograph those injuries when they first encounter that child. This is very important, first of all, because many of the injuries inflicted upon a child as a result of child abuse can't be seen. Those that are often heal very quickly. So even if a child is getting to a doctor within about 48 hours, the bruising, the swelling, all of those things can look different. So it's very important that these photographs are taken and that they are made available to the physician that is assessing this child and providing medical care to this child. The bill also talks about the importance of retaining these photographs and making sure that all who are party to this investigation have access to these photos, whether it's the medical part of the team, law enforcement, child welfare, or other members of the child multidisciplinary team that might be staffing that case. If House Bill 3328, Carly's Law, had been law in the fall of 2004, Carly Sheehan would probably today be a laughing, dancing 5-year-old child. We can't fix that. We can't go back in time and bring Carly back. But we can learn from this tragedy and reach out to help those other children, hopefully preventing not just further child deaths, but helping those children who continue to suffer the effects of physical abuse. We know that a child who is physically abused has a 50% chance or greater of being re-abused. We need to offer protection and help to these children. There are a couple of other important provisions to House Bill 3328. The first is that about 2 years ago, the governor instituted a new program that was called the Critical Incident Response Team. When there was a high-profile tragedy in the child welfare system, this multidisciplinary team would do an external review and look for any systemic improvements that might need to be made for the system. This did not happen in Carly's case. This bill says that anytime there's a child fatality involving a child who has previously been known to the agency, who's been the subject of a child abuse investigation, that this external review will happen. It also allows the district attorney who's prosecuting the homicide to be able to issue a letter to the governor and the director of the Department of Human Services outlining any improvements to the system that she or he found while doing that investigation. Colleagues, this is a complicated bill. It's also a simple bill. This is about getting kids medical attention when they need it. It's about helping those who are most vulnerable. I look forward to answering your questions, but I look more forward to seeing the aye votes tallied up on this board and again in the Senate so that we can provide the necessary protection and response to these extremely vulnerable children. Thank you.